Hi, this is Rich Uzdowski, and I'm here today with Kay Rankin, and we are doing an interview for the Center for Middletown Studies at Ball State's High School Consolidation Oral History Project. And Kay was nice enough to come in and talk and share her experiences and opinions. And before we get started today, Kay, would you mind saying your name so that everyone...
Yes, I am Kay Rankin.
All right, thank you. And again, to start, before we really dive into the questioning, if you wouldn't mind telling us your address, your age, your job, hobbies, interests, any sort of thing like that.
Well, I am 67 years old. I live on South Hawthorne here in Muncie.
Mm-hmm.
I am a graduate of Muncie Central High School. I am a graduate of Ball State University, both my bachelor's and master's. And I taught in the Muncie schools for 41 years. I taught for 3 years at the old Muncie Central, or what we call the real Muncie Central. Then I was at Northside for 17 years, and then I was back at Muncie Central for the last 21 years that I taught. And I taught, started out teaching business and English, and after I transferred to Northside, I just taught business the rest of the time. And since I have retired in 2009, my kids say I failed retirement because I have continued to work. I've had different jobs with the school corporation. And matter of fact, today I'm going up and volunteering and helping with the basketball season tickets. So.
And you're sporting the Muncie
I'm
Central
still,
colors
yes,
today?
because the volleyball team plays tonight for the sectionals or regional title. So.
Okay. And starting the formal questioning here, what are your thoughts and opinions on the high school consolidation, and have they changed in the last year since the actual decision was made to consolidate?
Well, my opinion has not changed. I feel that it was something that should have been done several years ago. Due to declining enrollment in Muncie, loss of jobs with factories, the automobile industry, and those jobs are just not going to come back. And the cost of education continues to spiral out of control. No thanks to the government. So I think that it was a necessary decision to be made. And it's a tough decision to be made because no one wants to see their high school closed, but that needed to be done. So I haven't changed my opinion on that.
Now, when you say that you think it should have been done a few years ago, what do you think prevented it from being done sooner?
I think probably different members of the school board, community reaction, there were rumors. I have to give the current administration credit because they tried to, quote unquote, get all their ducks in a row before they started to make this decision. There was a huge difference between the closing of Southside and the closing of Muncie Northside. So in the way they were handled. But also you had a time difference and things change over the period of time too. So.
Would you mind talking about the differences?
No, I remember when Northside closed, I was teaching there, and we had a faculty meeting. We were called in for a faculty meeting, and Mr. Slaughter was the superintendent. And it was a tough call for him to make, but when you taught at Northside, and once again you saw the enrollment declining at Northside, you knew that it was something that was bound to happen. But we were told that it would be closed, that none of us would lose our jobs, and that we could have a choice between staying at Northside as a middle school, going to Muncie Central, or going to Muncie South. And we had to pack all of our stuff, and we had to go through some interview processes of where we were going to be the next school year. And I didn't want to stay at a middle school because that's just not my forte.
Yeah.
I did not want to go to Muncie South because I've been from Muncie my whole life, and I went to Muncie Central, and that was it. So to be sure that I did get transferred to Muncie Central, I said I would take on the cheerleaders. So there were 36 cheerleaders that year, plus the mascot, and I was the only person responsible for them. So what you don't do to get what you want to do, I guess.
Yeah.
But this year, this past year with the consolidation, there were numerous committees. I think 24, 25 committees were set up to deal with the process of the transition. They worked with the kids, they worked with the faculty, they worked with the community. So there was a huge difference in how they handled different things.
So what impact would you say those committees will play?
I think the committees, for the most part, I think kind of brought the community together. It's all about the kids. It's not about me, but it's about the kids, what's best for the kids. And what we end up doing that's best for the kids, in this particular case, I think has turned out to be what's best for the community as well. And Muncie needed to come together. Muncie was too separated, Southside and the north side of town. And so they need to come together, and the kids, ironically, are the ones that will bring it together.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that the consolidation was what was best for the kids.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Well, because of for several reasons. Number one, academics, which should be first and foremost. But there were numerous, and this even happened when Northside was open. There were a lot of special classes, AP classes, high honors classes that would not go because you didn't have enough students that would be enrolled in it. Maybe only 5 kids signed up for it, so that class didn't go. Well, the same thing's been true for the last several years at Central and South. Well, now, if you take 8 kids from Central and 8 kids from South that signed up for a class, you got 16 kids who want to take an AP class, and so that class will go. So there are more AP classes that are being offered, and they're going to add some more for next year. For different clubs and organizations, new clubs have been formed. Other clubs have kind of been resurrected. If you say, the bands coming together and winning the state fair is huge. That was just huge for this community. And then as far as athletics are concerned, Central has long been a member of the North Central Conference, which has been a well-respected conference in the state. And Southside has not belonged to a conference for years because they were a member of the Olympic Conference, and those schools have closed, like Kokomo Hayworth, Muncie Northside, Anderson Highland. So those schools have closed, and so the conference disappeared. Well, for those athletes, there were no conference championships to be won. There was no being named as an all-conference player or all-conference academic. So that was not fair to those athletes, that they were missing out on something that the majority of the students in the state who are athletes, their schools belong to a conference. So
Yeah.
that's very good for them.
So what would you say to the people who spoke up at the town hall meetings and said that they predicted if the schools came together, there would be less athletic opportunities just because for purely numbers reasons, there wouldn't be enough spots on the team?
Well, the only sport that really applies to is boys basketball, because you only can take X number of kids on the team. But for football, they had more students out for football. They were able to have a freshman football team, which was great because it allowed those kids an extra opportunity to play in games, to get time, playing experience. Increase the size of the JV team. For all the other sports, they were able to add an additional team, reserve team, if you will. So that is good. And also, Southside has struggled in athletics for the last several years. And they've had some outstanding athletes, but got nothing, so to say. And so this gave them an opportunity. This gives them an opportunity to hopefully be a part of a winning thing.
Sure.
And one of the volleyball coaches at Southside he's had some good players over the years, but the Southside volleyball team they've never gone much of any place. So this gives them an opportunity. He's an assistant coach with this year's Central team, so they won the sectional on Saturday night, and so they're going to be playing in the regional. Well, this is a first for him, and I just think that's wonderful. So it's wonderful for some of the coaches as well as it is for some of the kids. And then for swimming is another sport, and which is dear to my heart because both my kids swam. But I have been told that this year there are 10 divers, and that is almost unheard of, that you have 10 divers, 5 girls and 5 boys. So I think that that's great, and the kids will come out and hopefully find some success and some new camaraderie and make new friends that way.
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that in terms of which side you were on in the consolidation debate, you were on the keeping central side.
Right.
And could we say that you are a Northsider or a central person at heart?
Oh, have always been a central person at heart.
Okay.
I mean, I growing up, that was the only thing that we, as young kids, that's all we dreamed about was the day that we could go to Muncie Central.
Mm-hmm.
And then during my sophomore year at Central, there were 2,500 students in a building meant to hold 1,500. We went to school in 3 shifts, and the fall of my junior year, that's when Southside opened, in the fall of '62. And so some of the kids who had been at Central could choose if they wanted to go to Southside or remain at Central. And we couldn't understand why they would choose to go to Southside because they had all grown up knowing that they were going to be at Central. So that was hard to understand for a lot of us. And the thing with Northside was only open for 18 years, so the longevity of the school was not as well grounded in the community as was Southside.
Well, I think maybe I asked that question wrong. Because I guess when I said, do you identify with the north side, I meant the north side of town.
Oh, north side of town. Yeah. Well, here's the thing is, I live on the north side of town, north of the tracks, whatever. Because the tracks for years, and I found this out doing some research, even back in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, the railroad tracks were the dividing line for Muncie, even back then. And we seem to think that it's like a 50-year dividing line, but it's existed for more than 100 years. But when I was born and when I first started school, I lived on the south side of Muncie. The majority of people who are from Muncie at some point or another, I would say, lived on the south side of town because that's where your homes were for the people who were the factory workers.
Sure.
So that was just that residential area. And then as Ball Hospital was built, Ball State University began to grow, then the west side of town began to expand.
Now, I'm picking up the notes you gave me that I think it's an editorial you said?
Yes, I wrote that as an editorial. It's also, I condensed it for a speech, for a 3-minute speech at one of the town hall meetings.
Well, I was interested in this quote you have here. It says, "Fact, it is just Muncie. There is no East Muncie, West Muncie, North Muncie, or South Muncie. Just Muncie."
We're Muncie.
Okay.
It's Muncie. I mean, it's Muncie, Indiana. You do not send an address to somebody and you don't address it such and such a street, South Muncie, Indiana, 4730, whatever. It's just Muncie, Indiana. And previous school boards divided the city by the names of the schools that they gave them. Because they named them Southview, Northview, Westview, Southside. There was no East Side. So, and then Northside High School. So previous school boards, by naming the schools, the directions, kind of separated the city, because then people kind of had a tendency to say, well, I'm from the south side of town, rather than just saying I'm from Muncie.
So you're saying that it's not really all it's cracked up to be, the idea of a separated Muncie?
Well, I think it's there. I think it exists. But the reality of it is, it's just Muncie. The reality of it, you don't address a card to, I wouldn't send a card to you
Sure.
and say Ball State University, Indiana, even though Ball State has its own zip code. But, or it used to have its own zip code, I think it still does, 47306, I believe.
Yeah. No, it does.
Yeah, I remember that from the registrar's office. But I think this community, if the community wants to grow and become better, it has to come together. So that means that everybody, regardless of where you live, has to come together and work on it. And when it was just Muncie Central 50-some years ago, you had your separate groups. I mean, you had poverty, you had your lower middle class, upper middle class, you had your wealthy kids, but you had the little bridges in between that would bridge those economic groups. And so nobody thought too much about, oh, well, you live over there, or you live there. I mean, it wasn't that much of an issue.
There were several speakers, though, at the town hall meetings, mostly from the south side of town, that stood up and said basically that the south side, or people on the south side, get the shaft. So do you think there's something to be said for this symbolic or ideological divide?
Well, I know that they feel that way. And if you drive through the south side of town, you can see the homes, the houses that have been left empty and that are dilapidated, so to say, but you can drive around all areas of Muncie, unfortunately, and find that. You don't have the businesses on the south side of town. Now, 50 years ago, they did. But once again, 50 years ago, you had your factories that were in town. Well, the businesses moved, Muncie Mall opens, everything shifts to the north side of town. And even people who opened up businesses in the south side of town have had to close their doors because they weren't being supported. So, I don't know, it's kind of hard to say what some of the feelings are. Because I'm not there. I can't even, I'm not from that. I don't know.
Sure.
It's even hard for me to kind of speculate.
No.
It's just like, when I take the cheerleaders, we go to Jay County or to Blackford to a game on a Friday night, and there's all these cars coming into town. And the girls would say, well, where are these people going? I said, they're coming to Muncie to shop. And they go, Muncie to shop? And I said, yeah. Because these girls would go to Indianapolis to shop.
The girls from Muncie, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So my cheerleaders, those girls would go to Indianapolis to do their shopping. And it was hard for them to grasp the concept that people from Western Ohio and Eastern Indiana were coming to Muncie to shop. Because to them, that was like going to Indianapolis. So they didn't quite catch that. So depending on where you live and how you're brought up and what your socioeconomic background is, that's how you kind of perceive different things.
It's different perspectives.
Yes. But we have to realize that there are some extremely nice homes on the south side of town. And there are some wealthy people who have lived on the south side of town and probably still do. But we tend to forget that because we tend to think everything's focused on the wealthy on being on the north and the west side of Muncie. And that is not necessarily true.
Okay, and just considering everything you've said so far, your opinions, your background, what you thought about the whole process, do you feel like your voice was heard, or what you stood for, that voice was heard during the process?
I think it was heard. I think, did it have an impact on the decision? I don't think so. But I think the community heard. I had several people make comments to me afterwards. They were glad that I stood up and spoke. Because I did not speak as myself. I spoke as the president of the Muncie Central Alumni Association to represent that group. So I think most of the members of the school board knew how I felt anyway. So the administration knew how I felt. So I don't know. I guess you'd like to think you made a difference, but I think I just spoke for another group and got something off my chest.
Well, in our interview with Mr. Costello, who is the president of the school board, he really emphasized the fact that the town hall meeting process was sort of unprecedented. And for a situation like this, the fact that there was 4 town hall meetings where people could stand up and speak their mind. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was. And I think, I don't know that they were necessary as far as the school board actually making this decision. But I think it was a step by the school board and the administration to let people voice their opinions.
Huh. So are you almost saying it was nice that they let people talk, but in reality, no matter what people said, the show was going to go on?
Right. That's what I think.
Okay.
But I think that, but see, that didn't happen when Northside was closed. No one had an opportunity to express an opinion of any kind. And you know, sometimes all people want to do is just express their opinion. They just want their voice to be heard. They don't care whether anybody votes along with their opinion. They just want their opinion to be heard. And I think, and I got tickled because a student stood up, and he was from Southside, and I knew he had been paying attention because he said to the school board, he said, "You are all acting like this is all about money." And I thought, well, I think he's got that right, because it is about the money, the lack of the funds that they had. So in reality, Muncie could not justify financially supporting 2 high schools.
So the Southsiders who spoke up and kind of said that they knew that Southside was going to be closed and everyone was going to move into Central, are you saying they were sort of right to suspect that?
And it had been rumored for a while. There had been a rumor floating around for a while. But if you look at the logistics of different things, I mean, it's called Muncie Central. It's located centrally in the city. It has the facilities, more facilities to support the community as such. And so I mean, most people just knew. I mean, but nothing is set in stone, you know, nobody knew anything for sure. Would I have been devastated if they had closed Central and kept Southside open? Yes, I would have been.
What would you say to those Southsiders who were probably equally as devastated that Southside was closed to move to Central?
Having been at Northside when Northside was closed, I kind of have an understanding of what they were going through. I think the important thing is you don't let go of that heritage. I think we all have to take charge of our own heritage. And so that would be the important thing that I think that they have to hold on to. You take Union School right now, or in Randolph County, they're fighting whether they're facing an issue whether they're even going to exist in another year or two, and that's an entire corporation. That's just not a school. So that's, you know, that's so scary. I mean, it's scary, it's sad, because there's all the tradition, all the camaraderie and everything that's there.
So how do you think Southside and the Southsiders should go about keeping that heritage going?
Well, one of the ways, and they are working on this, is they are going to establish a memorabilia room in the building, is my understanding.
In the field house or in
No,
Central?
in
Central?
At Southside.
Oh, okay.
And there is to be one established at Northside. This is my understanding. And the good thing because students who come back for class reunions want to tour the building that they attended.
Makes sense, yeah.
So if you tour the building that you attended, that's where you want to look at that trophy, that team picture, that letter jacket, whatever. That's what you want to do. Well, Muncie Central's been blessed with more than 140 years of treasures, and those are located in a memorabilia room, the foresight of a woman about 15 years ago that started this up. And it continues to grow, and it is a very impressive room to go into. Southside has a lot of things to put on display that they have to be proud of. They have a state championship band, state championship basketball team, state championship in wrestling. There are students who have achieved a lot of academic honors and success. Students have gone on to professional sports. But the same thing's true with Northside. And for the first time, a group of Northside athletes are going to be recognized this year. See, Northside was never recognized for anything. And at the first boys basketball game this year, the 1974 and the 1975 state championship girls volleyball teams from Northside are going to be recognized at that ball game. And those banners are hanging in the field house now. So the community has made an effort to reach out to incorporate all this. And one of the things that happened, and I had mixed emotions about this, because they were going to hang Southside State Championship basketball banner in the field house. And I had mixed emotions about that, because I thought they didn't play at the field house, they played their games at Southside, and no, you just don't hang that banner there, and so on and so forth. So I was in there a few weeks ago, and I saw all the banners that are hanging, and it looks pretty impressive because they've added banners.
Yeah.
They added the state runner-up banners for Muncie Central, so there's a few more purple banners that are hanging, and they also hung the banners for the Northside volleyball state championship team, which there are 3 of those. So it does look pretty impressive when you go in there and you see all those banners. It does look pretty impressive. So that was a good foresight on someone's part, and some private donation made those banners. That did not come out of any school funding. So they look nice. It is but the point is, it's impressive for Muncie.
Sure.
It makes Muncie look like it's a champion, which it very well is and can be.
And going back to the talk about the divisions between Northside and Southside, I think you're absolutely correct to say that they've been around for a very long time. And the Linds themselves, in their book Middletown on Muncie, they said that during the 20s, they noticed this divide. It was present in the schools, and they said that there were parents from the south side of town who would even pull their kids out of school just because they weren't accepted when they went to Central. And there were several speakers at the town hall meetings leading up to the consolidation that expressed concern about the way the students from the two sides of town would interact, even 80 plus years later. Why do you think that is? Where was their concern coming from?
Well, that's a good question. That's deep. I remember doing research on the history of the Muncie schools, that they built a second elementary school, I believe it was on South Madison Street, and it might have been Walnut, but anyway, it said just south of the tracks to accommodate the people who live south of the tracks, and that was in the late 1800s or 1900. And I thought, wow, they talked about south of the tracks that long ago. So going back to people being accepted, today we talk a lot about diversity, and you have to accept people for who they are and not pass judgment, but that's something that's been taught for years, basically. Used to teach it in Sunday school classes and so on, but of course you can't talk about that Sunday school classes in school anymore, because that's could be bad. But I think that a lot of it had to do with, I think the factory worker, there was a real divide between blue collar and white collar workers. And so I think that's where that came about. Most of your factory workers or your blue collar workers lived on the south side of town, where the bosses lived on the north side of town. And of course you didn't want to intermingle, because a factory worker, maybe he dropped out of high school or didn't have the college degree that the boss had, or the business hadn't been passed down to him. So I think but I think you have that regardless of where it is. I think people have that feeling that they're not accepted because they didn't go to college or they didn't get a special training and they're not equal to somebody else. And, I grew up, my dad worked in the factory. My mom didn't work. We lived just west of downtown on Kilgore Avenue. That's where I grew up. I never knew I wanted for anything. But if I look back, I realize that no, I didn't have a lot of things that some of my friends had, because maybe their dad had a better job than what my dad had. But I never knew I wanted for anything because I was loved, and because there was a strong family thing. And I was never taught that I was less than anyone else, nor that I was better than anyone else. So that goes along to parenting type of thing. So, and I remember one of the big things that was so important in high school with high school girls was to have a pair of Spalding saddle Oxfords. That was a big thing.
What are those?
You had
What
Spaldings,
are those?
they were called Spalding saddle Oxfords. So you could get saddle Oxfords. The saddle Oxfords were white shoes that had black across the arch. They tied. But if you had Spaldings, the sole was red. And they were that's what you had to have. So my mom finally let me get a pair of them. And then I was devastated because she polished them. Well, you never polished your Spaldings. You just let them wear. She polished them one day. I got ready to wear them. I said, "You polished my Spaldings."
What was she
Nobody
thinking?
polishes your Spaldings. What were you thinking? So you have those things that kind of made you feel like you were in.
Sure.
You were in the in group. But it was, you look back on it now and you just think, it was. But I wish I still had those Spaldings. I don't want to have them do them.
We're going to kind of switch gears here and move on to talking about identity and community identity. And so what role do you think a high school plays in a community identity? And I know you've kind of touched on this already, but if you could...
Well, I think that as students, I think society is quick not to allow or to accept ideas that students have.
Okay.
And I think that young people, 16 to 18-year-olds, some of them have some pretty good ideas on how some things might work or something new to try or whatever else. And when and teaching, and I had to teach computer classes that was totally new to me. And I knew that I couldn't fake that. I could fake typing, but I couldn't fake knowing the computer. So I opened myself up to the students. If you know how to do something on here, please share, because that's how. And so the kids did. So you have to be accepting to what the students know. And then if you could take what they know and then maybe take it another step with them, that's how you grow and that's how you gain things. But I think that's what we have to allow with our students today. These kids are working together. They are forming teams. They're forming friendships. They're learning that they have a lot in common that for some reason they never thought they did have. Because, unfortunately, society's instilled in them that, oh, you're from South Muncie, you're from North Muncie. You have nothing in common. When in reality, they do. They both like the same sports. They like computer games. They like to read. They like to walk. They like to talk, whatever. They all have their various interests out there. So I think we need to let the kids, I think we need to really lean on the kids. And so the school needs to provide them with good leadership so that they can take that.
Accentuate the similarities rather than the differences.
Right. And even though take your differences, but you can learn from your differences.
Okay, yeah.
Because when I taught business law, I always told the kids, you don't know why that person feels the way they do. You know, it has to do with the way they were reared by their parents. It has to do with their religion. It has to do with their socioeconomic background, where they live. You don't have to agree with them, but you need to listen to them.
Sure.
And you need to learn to accept why they feel that way. Doesn't mean you have to change your opinion, but you need to be open to the way other people. And in reality, students are more closed-minded than some adults because, you know, I always ask the kids, I said, how stupid are your parents? Well, really stupid. I said, well, mine were too. You know, they want me to do all these stupid things. But in reality, if you would listen to your parents a little bit, they have a little more open-mindedness. Not all parents, but the majority of them do.
Now, would you say that Southside for the south side of town and Central for the north side of town, do you think those two high schools meant or mean different things to each side of town? In terms of identity?
No, I think each school, that section of society that has students in school, that's the identity that they want. What I was amazed as I sat on a couple of these transition committees, I was amazed at how two high schools in the same corporation in the same city did things differently. That amazed me because you would think that they would be all on the same track.
Could you give any examples of the differences then?
Yeah, well, one of the examples would deal with discipline. And this is word of mouth, so sure. I don't have quote unquote facts type thing. Sure. But I do know that, because I've heard from various sources, that, for example, dress code violations were addressed differently at Muncie Central than they were at Muncie South. That Muncie Central was a little harsher on dress code violations than what Southside was. Why that is, I don't know. I mean, did it have to do with the administration in the building? Did people think that, well, that's just the way the kids dress, and so we'll just let go of that? I took my granddaughter out when she was in middle school and bought her a pair of jeans. And she was so excited, and she wore them to school, only to have her mother called to bring her a different pair of jeans because the jeans I bought her were not acceptable to the dress code.
Way to go.
They said, your grandma knows the dress code. We can't believe she bought you these jeans. But I did because I thought, I didn't actually realize that they had holes in them. I thought it was just I thought it was something sewn onto them.
Sure you did.
Yeah. well, so grandma messed up there. So would she have been called out at Wilson Middle School, or had she been at Southside? I don't know. But she was at Northside Middle School.
Okay. And you've talked here and there about the effects that you've seen in terms of what's came about after the consolidation, but would you mind talking a little bit more about that and maybe some larger general changes that have come about because of consolidation?
Well, I think, the first thing that you can point to is the band. And of course they had, in doing the band, they had to have new uniforms. Because you couldn't take the Southside uniforms, Central uniforms, and have a band, because you want everybody to be uniform that day, so obviously it's called a uniform. So the band, and by the band working so hard, and the band directors from both schools working together, and then to win the state fair at competition was just, well, that's phenomenal. And if the entire community cannot have a lot of pride about that, then there's something wrong with somebody, because there's just nothing that makes you any prouder. New uniforms for the athletic teams. It was great. Because a couple years ago, I saw a Southside freshman team, basketball team play, and they wore 3 different uniforms.
Okay.
And that is not team unity. And that's sad. That is sad that they had to scrape together these 3 different uniforms to constitute a team. I just thought that was sad. So you have this. 'Cause everybody's in town, their big thing is, what's the boys basketball team going to be like this year? That's the big thing. Got a new coach. Is Johnny, who was the star at Southside, is he going to make the team at Central? And you got all these different questions out. I know the basketball coach. I've known him since he was in high school, because he graduated from Muncie Central. But he has new basketball uniforms, and the kids want to see them. He won't show them to them. He said, "I'm not showing them to you till you make the team." Which I think is kind of great in a way, because he's telling them, you got to work hard and you got to make the team to do this. And he dismissed open gym with the boys the other day. I was told by a parent, and told them not to come back. He would let them know when to come back, because they were not practicing as a team. And he said, we can't have that. If you're not going to practice as a team, we're not having this.
What do you think he meant by that, not practicing as a team?
You gotta, it's that saying, there's no I in team.
Mm-hmm.
There's 5 boys on your team. That it's not just one player, it's 5 of you that are working together.
Yeah.
And so he did not see those 5 working together as somebody trying to showboat or be too individualistic for different things. He said, open gym's closed for a while until I can see that.
Now, I want to pull another quote here from the editorial you gave me, and it's fact. The factories and the jobs are not returning to the city, meaning Muncie. And I'm wondering what role you see deindustrialization playing in the whole consolidation process and the people moving out of town. Where do you see all that?
Well, the loss of the factory jobs was huge. You lost population. It was a blow to the economy. People didn't have jobs. People moved as a result of those jobs, and so they weren't there. Jobs are coming back, but they're a different type of a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the factory worker from the 40s and the 50s and even the 60s isn't going to be able to go in one of these new jobs because he doesn't have the qualifications for it. Because the job market's changing. And even working in a factory, there's a lot of robotics that goes on in the factory. So it's your job as a factory worker might be seeing, is the robot doing the thing right? Not you necessarily doing the different things. And so until they can get some businesses in town and up and going with different things, so it's going to be tough, I think, to bring the jobs back, to bring people back into the community. You know, Ball State's huge, a large employer. The hospital's a large employer. But you have to have, but so many people commute anymore. You know, they maybe live in Noblesville and they come here to work, and
or vice versa.
Vice versa.
Yeah.
You've got to have people here. You know, if I'm gonna, I was always a firm believer, if the Muncie Community Schools was good enough to pay my salary,
Yeah.
they were good enough to educate my kids.
You know, that's interesting that you say that, because in our interview with Mr. Heller, he said something to the effect of how mad it makes him to see some of the teachers that he employs sending their kids out into different school corporations.
Right. And I think, and I understand that maybe I don't live within Muncie proper or within the Muncie Community School District, but my child should go to a public school because the public school system is paying my salary. I had a sister-in-law in Kokomo who taught in the public schools in Kokomo, but she wasn't impressed with the kindergarten that her son was going to attend in the public school. So they sent him to a private school, and his sister, up until they reached high school, or maybe 10th grade, because at that point they realized the private school wasn't providing them with some of the academic classes that they needed to have in order to get into college. But it also doesn't provide them, I don't think, with the total developmental skills to function in society. Because your high school, or any school really, any public school, let me put it that way, any public school is a mirror of the community. So Longfellow over here is a mirror of this Whiteley community. What you see there in Longfellow, the students that you see there are the students that you're going to see in the Whiteley community. And the students that you see at Muncie Central are a mirror of the people, of the citizenship that you see that make up Muncie. So I think that's so important to understand that they need to be there. And I had a former student call me several years ago because the only thing her son wanted to do was go to Muncie Central. And all of her friends said, oh, don't send him, don't send him, don't send him. Although they lived in Muncie District. I said, he'll be fine. Well, he did. He was honor student. He got honor roll. He got academic awards. He's a student at IU. He played soccer. Her daughter did the same thing. They're sending their youngest son to a different school. It's a public school, but a different school. And I kind of have mixed emotions about that. But part of that is a parental decision that you may know what's best for your child as to maybe where they go. I don't know what their reasoning was behind that, but.
Now, what would you say to the parents who made the decision, once the new consolidation was going to happen, to take their kids and move them to the county schools?
They're jumping the gun. They don't. And you don't, those are formative years for a child. Don't jerk them out of their friends and a comfort zone that they're in. They're already being moved from that by having not going, maybe if you're a senior and you've been at Southside and now you got to go to Central, okay. But don't jerk them out of that comfort zone where at least they're still going to be with friends from Southside, and put them in a county school where they know no one. And it's a total thing. It's expensive. You got to pay for gas to drive them there. And Anderson did the same thing when Anderson went to one high school. Daleville and Yorktown got a lot of students from Anderson because parents were. Well, you know what? That 20 or 30-minute drive, that's going to get old after a while for high school. And I'm thinking that's kind of dropped off a little bit too. So,
now, what advice would you give to the kids now who are living in the city of Muncie as it is, and going to school in the school system as it is now?
Well, you have to make the best of it that you can. In other words, I as a teacher, I can only present things to you. It's up to you to learn. And you need to make the best of it and the most that you can of what's there for you. You need to take advantage of the things that are there for you. One of the best kept secrets here in Muncie with the school system is the Muncie Area Career Center. And I would talk to I worked there for a couple of years, and I talked to 8th graders and I talked to 10th graders. And I told them, I am not going to stand up here and tell you that if you get a college degree that you're going to have a better job and a better life. There's no guarantee about that. But I will tell you this, you have to have a high school diploma, and you have to have some training beyond high school to be successful in life. And don't put down people for the job they do. Because I have to have the auto mechanic work on my car. I have to have an electrician come in and fix my lighting. I have to have the plumber come into my house and work with that. I need a construction guy to fix some things. Just as much as I need someone to tell me what is physically wrong with me if I have a health issue. So don't stereotype people on the types of jobs that they do, because we all need someone to do that job.
Couldn't agree more.
That's all there is to it.
Now that wraps up the formal questioning that I had for you today, but I want to give you the floor to add anything you wanted to add or go back and comment on anything.
I just think that I felt tension and some stress myself. I felt for the people making the decision, because I know it was a tough decision for them to make. That's all there was to it. But it's one of those decisions that comes down to the practicality of it and financial and what you have to do. I think it was the right decision to make. And I just think that there are going to be some really good things that happen. I think things are going a lot more smoothly than what people thought they would. They've run into a snag here and a snag there, but that's going to happen. You can plan to your wits' end, but there's still going to be something that comes up. I used to make up demerits for my cheerleaders. And you got to give kids credit, because they will think of something that you did not think of. So I had a category called miscellaneous to cover anything that they may think that they're going to do that is just not appropriate to do. So you have that. My granddaughter is a sophomore at Central, and she was a little bit hesitant about the consolidation. But she has become more involved this year. And so I think that is really good. And there's a new club that they formed. It's called the Psychology Club. And so she joined it. And I said, well, what do you do? Analyze people or what? I don't know what they do. I don't know why she chose to join that, but I just think that those organizations are there. And another really positive thing, there was a teacher from Southside who for several years orchestrated a bazaar at Southside to raise money for a senior trip. Well, first of all, I have to give her credit because I would never want to take kids on a trip anymore. But I got to give the woman credit for doing that. She is doing that bazaar up at Central. So for people to say that everything that Southside had is lost is not true. Because she is doing that. And last night I took pictures at the National Honor Society initiation. And it was a blend of what Muncie Central had done for initiation and of what Muncie Southside had done. So I think the people are working together and trying to draw the best from both and to see that that all works together. So I think that it's a good thing, and I want to see this community grow. It's my home. It's always been my home, and I'm proud of it. And sometimes I'm not proud of it. There's those little stories, you know, that you hear once in a while. But it's my home, and I'm proud to say that I'm from Muncie. So I think it's a good thing.
If you don't mind, I think that's something great to end on. And just one more time, thank you for sitting down and talk with us today, Kay.
That's just fine. I hope this is recorded.